A reading from Joshua. When the entire nation had finished crossing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua,
"Select 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and command them."
Take 12 stones from here, out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood. Carry them over with you.
Carry them over with you.
Carry them over with you.
And lay them down in the place where you camped tonight.
Then Joshua summoned the 12 men from the Israelites, whom he had appointed, one from each tribe. Joshua said to them,
Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder.
A stone on his shoulder.
One for each of the tribes of the Israelites, so that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, what do those stones mean to you?
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 Then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the Israelites a memorial forever.
Forever.
The Israelites did as Joshua commanded. They took up 12 stones out of the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord told Joshua, carried them over with them to the place where they camped, and laid them down there.
Joshua set up 12 stones in the middle of the Jordan, in the place where the feet of the priest bearing the Ark of the Covenant has stood, and they are there to this day.
They are there to this day.
To this day.
This day.
Good morning. Thanks be to God for beautiful, inspiring, powerful music. We are going to transition from stone to stone, from Joshua's text to a text about stone and rock in the New Testament. Turn with me and hold Joshua in your heart as you do to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 19, as Jesus begins his move into Jerusalem. After Jesus had said this, he went on ahead, walking up to Jerusalem. When he had come near to Bethphage and Bethany, at the place called the Mount of Olives, he sent 2 of the disciples, saying, Go into the village ahead of you, and as you enter it, you will find tied there a colt that has never been ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, Why are you untying it? Just say, The Lord needs it. So those who were sent departed and found it as he had told them. As they were untying the colt, its owners asked them, Why are you untying the colt? They said, The Lord needs it. Then they brought it to Jesus, and after throwing their cloaks on the colt, they sat Jesus on it. As he rode along, people kept spreading their cloaks on the road. As he was now approaching the path down from the Mount of Olives, the whole multitude of the disciples began to praise God joyfully with a loud voice for all the deeds of power that they had seen, saying, Blessed is the King who comes in the name of the Lord, peace in heaven and glory in the highest heaven. Some of the Pharisees in the crowd said to him, Teacher, order your disciples to stop. He answered, I tell you, if these were silent, the stones would shout. This is the word of the Lord. Sticks and stones are for breaking bones. That's how they express it. They say words are just words. They don't hurt. Yeah, that really is your point. I wouldn't press it. We know words have great power. They can destroy or they can build. Stones, though, memorialize words and people and moments and movements and ideas. When you look at a stone, what happened once happens still. Stones make you recall not just what was said, but what was done. And that really is how stones make or break you. Stones tell you who lost and who won. The 12 stones Joshua caused to be plucked from the Jordan River, carried over into the land, and laid down in the place of the people's encampment were to be living reminders that the enslaved were now free. The conquered were now conquerors. The homeless were now home. God had fulfilled God's promise to God's people. Whenever the people threatened to forget, the stones would make them remember. Centuries later, at another momentous crossing over, when Jesus prepared for passage into Jerusalem, he declared that God's reign was being realized through him as God's Messiah. If God's people wouldn't shout amen to that, then the rocks would. Jesus' story of stones starts with Jerusalem and all the city means for Jesus in Luke's gospel. Jerusalem epitomizes the tradition of power, the empowerment of tradition. The way things were is the way things always will be, a sentiment embodied by the very solidity, the gravitas of the very stones that made up the temple architecture. Luke 9:51 marks the beginning of the Lucan travel narrative. Jesus turns his face toward Jerusalem. He makes the turn proclaiming a radical messianic ministry mandate: resources for the poor, release for the captive, sight for the blind, vision for the confused, liberation for the oppressed, the elimination of debt for everyone encumbered by it. He concludes this transformational ministry with a climactic, radical, revolutionary message. As John Carroll puts it in his Luke commentary, in a final public statement addressed to the disciples with all the people overhearing, Jesus condemns an exploitative economic system that fosters status seeking even as it oppresses the poor, then presents a prophetic preview of the conflict, crisis, decisive judgment, and liberation that will usher the people toward the end of history. Having preached this mutinous messianic message, Jesus goes out and lives it. By his actions, he challenges sacrosanct traditions about food, about Israelite identity, about Sabbath, about what kinds of people should people up with, about whom people should love and how they should love them, about race and ethnicity and the assurance that those Gentiles, othered over there as outsiders, also dwelled well inside God's communion of love, about gender and equal gender access to him and all that his ministry promised. Such challenges dreamed up in Galilee on the northern fringe of Palestinian power would promise the specter of radical disruption in the southern center of Israelite identity, the capital itself, the seat of the great Jerusalem temple and all the scribal and priestly and Roman authority attached to it. In this context, Jesus in Jerusalem is code for capital chaos. Righteous rumble, holy hubbub, spiritual stink, sanctified spasm, theological tumult, messianic mess. Walking to Jerusalem is walking into trouble. Making change in a little backwater town with minor politicians and neighborhood associations and block watch captains is one thing. Going into the capital and telling the people who make the laws, interpret the laws, enforce the laws, and wrap all of that legalese up in a patriotic religious fervor that idolizes you if you agree with the prevailing political sentiment and demonizes you if you don't, is nothing short of a declaration of religious righteous revolution. When he had come near to Bethpage and Bethany at the place called the Mount of Olives, this is just what Jesus is doing, sparking a religious revolution. This is what Luke means to tell us when he tells us that Jesus went on ahead walking up to Jerusalem. He says it so simply, so cavalierly, but Jesus didn't just walk his way up to Jerusalem, he tore his way up to Jerusalem. It is hard to see this on the surface because we read this text from a perspective of privilege. As privileged North Americans who exist in the first world of resources, wealth, and power, even if we are not as powerful as some others in our world, we miss the clues that people who live in impoverished, occupied, oppressed communities, they see all too well. We delight in the spiritual mystery of it all. We treat Jesus like he is some messianic Jedi Knight who knows what is coming and sets things up in the present by appealing to his foreknowledge of the future. So miraculously, like he dreamed it beforehand, he knows that there is a horse out there, and he knows that his disciples will encounter some mild resistance when they attempt to liberate the horse for Jesus' messianic purpose. And he also miraculously foreknows that the person who owns the horse is a believer in his lordship and will release the horse when the disciples tells him that the Lord needs it. We delight in the prognosticating pageantry of it all. It's a parade to us. Folks lining the roadway, dressed up in festive colors, palm branches, waving out in the air, a colt that has never been ridden and probably never once poops on the pathway. Nice, shiny, beautiful, flowing mane, majestic and clean like a show pony. Everybody focused on Jesus riding in, his own long, flowing hair blowing in the wind. Neatly groomed beard, tanned white skin, piercing blue eyes, in deep spiritual meditation even as he bounces up and down on the pony's back. He might as well be afloat in the Thanksgiving Day Macy's parade, gliding down the corridors of wealth and power, a symbol of wealth and power and good spiritual humor himself. That's what I saw when I was growing up. King Jesus riding into town with his loyal subjects, waving him on with those leafy palm branches. I still do it today. Gather with church folk across Richmond, walk the streets in my jacket and tie after I have driven my nice car to the church parking lot and walk past the homeless lying on the sidewalks to raise high my palm branch and declare my appreciation and adoration for the Messiah who rides into town without changing a thing in the town. Because after all the palm branches have been waved, after the prayers have been prayed, after the collection has been collected, we go back into church and worship as usual, greet each other after church as usual, and then head to brunch. Palm Sunday, then and now. Unless you live as a campesino, a peasant, impoverished and imperiled in a place like Solentiname, Nicaragua. These campesinos read the circumstances surrounding the preparation of the Lord's Supper that are just like these circumstances surrounding the preparation for Palm Sunday's entry into Jerusalem, but they do it with very different eyes. Less miraculous, more down-to-earth eyes. Less pomp and circumstance, more meat and potatoes. We don't see what they see because we aren't meant to see what they see. We are meant to be blinded by our privilege of living safe, secure, spiritually successful lives. They see a passcode. You like adventure movies? I do. James Bond, Mission Impossible, Harry Potter. What's a good adventure story without a good password? Passwords and passcodes let you know when something or someone is safe. Blinking flashlights, blinking car headlights in the dead of the night. One blink of the coast is cleared, two blinks that the bad guys are on to us. Or to gain entry, you need the right password, words that people wouldn't normally use like balderdash or banana fritters or fairy lights or wattlebird or fortuna major or flibbertigibbet or oddsbodskins. What's the password? Scurvy cur. Okay, come on in. Or sometimes there are entire password phrases. If I say it looks stormy today, the safe response is, I don't own a raincoat. If I say it's a beautiful day, but I don't know if the sun will rise, the safe response is, he is risen. There are, of course, real historical passcodes, one if by land, two if by sea. The privileged person just sees a lamp lit or two lamps lit. They don't have any other cares in the world other than being able to see when it's dark out. The revolutionary knows that the British are coming. And how? Swing low, sweet chariot. The privileged slave owner heard some mighty pretty music. On the Underground Railroad, the runaway slave responded, I got my ticket. and got on board. The unprivileged peasants in Solitaname saw a passcode. You know, they saw it even in the Lord's Supper, what they understood to be a revolutionary meal. Very mysterious, one of them says. It seems to have been a clandestine supper. Yes, another agrees. It's clear that he had made an arrangement with a certain person in Jerusalem who had to be with a jug in a certain place. That was the signal. I suppose that a man with a jug of water would be something unusual because it was the women who hauled the water. The man was to go into a house. They were to follow him in there. And the gospel says that Jesus and his disciples didn't arrive until it was already night. In those days, he was already staying in hiding. He attacked the temple and went into hiding again. His hiding place was in the Gethsemane Grove. After the supper at midnight, he returned there, and the treachery of Judas was that he revealed the hiding place. But something very similar is happening with his entry into the Jerusalem passage. Jesus, already persona non grata with the traditionalists because of his non-traditional, transformational behavior. He can't just operate out in the open, neither can his people, because what he is doing will be stopped. So the revolutionary spiritual spy master issues the instruction for communicating through code. Go into the village. When you enter, you'll find a coat. It has never been written. Now, how are they supposed to know that it has never been written? You'll know because of all the colts you find out there. When you get near the right colt, someone will ask, why are you untying it? Well, the safe response is the Lord needs it. They won't say the Lord who. They won't ask, why does the Lord need it? They will just let you have it. Do what I say in exactly the way I say it, and you will end up back here with the right horse. Because what you're doing is as radical as it is important. And there are people out there who are as determined to stop what you are doing as you are determined to do it. Because what you are doing is a threat to the way people want things to be done, the way things have always been done, so that the people who have always benefited will continue to benefit. That is why Jesus resorts to such subterfuge. He knows that if the wrong people get wind of what is about to go down and what that going down is about to represent, that he, not the temple leaders, not the temple infrastructure, not the Roman rulers, is the one who represents God's rule on earth, then they will do everything in their power to stop it. Jesus wants to make sure they can't stop it. If they can't identify the parade route, the parade horse, and the parade's grand marshal, the parade is more likely to parade on. That's why he needed a passcode. What would it be like if the next version of church was so engaged in liberating revolutionary behavior that the Christians who populated that church needed to use passwords? So people in power couldn't challenge the empowering until it was too late. What if worship was so dangerous that you had to use a code to conduct it? What if the Eucharist was so egregious that you needed a safe word to get into a safe house to eat it? By the time the leaders catch on to what is happening with Jesus, it's already happening. The people are proclaiming Jesus Messiah. They are proclaiming Jesus' revolutionary way is God's way. The leaders know that if Jesus' way is indeed God's way, then their politics and their way, Rome's politics and Rome's way, are on the way out. They therefore realize that they must make Jesus stand down because Jesus has already put his plans into motion. They can't stop him. They can't stop the parade. The only alternative is to demand that the parade be stopped by Jesus' order. That Jesus order his people to stop proclaiming him as Messiah. It is at this point that Jesus declares that even if the people shut up, the rocks will cry out. People can be manipulated. Promise of reward, fear of retribution, terror of change. Perhaps the leaders could frighten the people so much about Roman retribution that they would cease declaring that Jesus is Messiah. Perhaps the leaders could promise the people so much status or privilege or financial compensation that they would cease declaring that Jesus is Messiah. But Jesus knows you can't buy a rock. You can't frighten a rock. A rock does what a rock does. It sits there or it stands there and it defiantly declares its rockness. It proclaims the truth of what it is. It is a monument to the truth of the moment in which it exists. The truth of this moment, Jesus declares, is that he is God's Messiah. You can pay people to repudiate it, discourage people from declaring it, terrify people from testifying to it, but the rocks will roar. Yeah, Joshua certainly thought so. Chapter 24, verse 27, Joshua said to all the people, "See, this stone shall be a witness against us, for it has heard all of the words of the Lord that he spoke to us. Therefore, it shall be a witness against you if you deal falsely with your God." Ears to hear, mouth to speak from a stone. Stones remember, and stones speak. Joshua's 12 stones at Gilgal are speaking stones. They say something about the dangerous thing happening in the life of the people of Israel. Their crossing over meant something about who they were becoming as a people. The stones witness to that becoming. The people will remember their becoming when they see the stones, but the stones will also make them remember the Hittites and the Hivites and the Perizzites, the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Jebusites. Even though the Hebrew people considered them other obstacles to be driven out in their conquest of the land, the stones will remember those people as people of the land, what used to be their land. So even as the stones tell the Hebrew children of their victorious conquest, the stones simultaneously remind the people that they took from others what was theirs before them. As Jesus will promise centuries later, you can try to hide the truth and you can refuse to tell the truth, but the stones will shout it out to chasten you, to challenge you to become the you God intended you to be. Perhaps the stones will remind you that how you took the land created a debt that you can only repay one day by living more justly with those whom you consider to be other in the land. In 2001, my wife Sharon and I visited South Africa. During part of the journey, we traveled from Cape Town to Robben Island, a rock quarry off the coast of Cape Town where Nelson Mandela and many of his colleagues in the fight against apartheid were unjustly imprisoned. Imprisoned for speaking and living transformation in a country defiantly holding on to inhuman tradition. On Robben Island, our tour guide was a gentleman who had been a political prisoner on that island. And he took us to these small cells. He showed us the tiny cell where for 18 of his 20 years in prison, Nelson Mandela was incarcerated. He spoke of the horrible conditions that Mandela and others endured. And then he took us on a trip across the desolate stretch of quarry land and the broiling heat and the white-hot sun from which there is no respite. These men were made to do physical, meaningless labor. We were shown a hole in a rock wall where for small stretches of time, prisoners were able to go in shelter from the brutal sun and heat. Of all that I saw and heard on that visit, what spoke to me most powerfully, though, was a pyramid of loose stone. As our guide stepped up before us, he explained that the men who had been incarcerated on Robben Island, when they returned, they remembered not only their imprisonment, but the reason for that imprisonment. They remembered not only the fight and the consequence of that fight, but more importantly, what they had been and were still fighting for. The men who came back to remember the past and have the past encourage them for the future created this pyramid of stone. One of them started by placing a stone by itself. Others followed, putting their stone next to the one or ones before it, until ultimately the pyramid of stone we saw that day had risen from the ground. That pyramid of stone spoke volumes. It spoke for justice, past, present, and future. And I suspect that if one day the people of South Africa forget what those men and women fought for, if they lose their vision and their voice, if they refuse to speak out for justice and equality and hope and promise, then those rocks will cry out. Oh, wouldn't that be something? If one great getting up Sunday morning, good church going, praise preoccupied, tithe making, committee constituting, mission tripping, evangelism evading, Christians took, one moment to be as powerful a voice as those stones are. Christians, once silent as they are saved, spoke up, spoke out, would cry out for somebody to act up with as much volume and vigor as those robin rocks. Wouldn't that be something? In my hometown of Richmond, Virginia, the famous Monument Avenue speaks in a different way. It has a 1.5-mile stretch of stone that has spoken and always will speak volumes. The first of Confederate General Robert E. Lee was placed in 1890 as a war memorial 25 years following the end of the Civil War. It was also erected in the context of resistance to burgeoning rights for African Americans and the dawn of Jim Crow and segregation. I was not surprised to read that 100,000 people showed up to see the statue unveiled. That stone called out to them, spoke a promise to them that the racial hatred Robert E. Lee rode into battle for was so precious to him that he would mutiny against his own country for, was raised high in stone so that black flesh and blood would keep to be poised and pushed down to the ground. That monument spoke volumes to them. Spoke so vividly that similar talking stones were erected on the avenue to give General Lee companionship and cover. As columnist Michael Paul Williams wrote in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, the 1902 Constitution disenfranchised African Americans and poor whites and further enshrined Jim Crow as the law of the land. In the years that followed, additional lost cause monuments depicting Confederate leaders were planned for and built on Monument Avenue. Even in the late 1800s, though, Monument Avenue stone did not speak the same message to everyone who lived in Richmond. The Richmond Magazine notes Richmond City Council had several black members and they refused to vote funds for either the 1887 Cornerstone ceremony or to support a city appropriation for the 1890 dedication of the monument. They didn't support it because they did not agree with what the stones were saying. Of the context and the monuments, the Wall Street Journal wrote, in 1902, Virginia passed a new state constitution that instituted a poll tax and literary tests for voting, drastically reducing the franchise. In that same year came a competition for a monument to President of the Confederacy, Jefferson Davis, from which Northern artists were explicitly excluded. But curiously, foreign artists were invited to submit. The symbolism was tricky. By custom, a civilian like Davis could not be depicted on horseback, and as the head of a defeated state, he did not warrant a triumphal arch. The answer was an insolent figure erected in 1907 of the Confederate president in furious oration, backed by a heroic column and a semicircle of 13 columns. The Davis Monument was widely understood to be a symbol of defiant racism, the architectural equivalent of a burning cross. It burns on Monument Avenue today. Knowing that stones speak, Richmond has tried over the years to lower the volume by erecting stone that, instead of denigrating the liberty and freedom of African Americans and valorizing the men who led the effort to take that freedom away, speaks instead about the dignity and humanity of African Americans, like tennis champion Arthur Ashe and pioneering banker Maggie L. Walker, and of late, African American artist Kehinde Wiley's striking statue, Rumors of War. It depicts the unswept locks of an intrepid black horseman in a hoodie, ripped jeans, and Nike sneakers, inspired by the Monument Avenue statue of Confederate General Jeb Stuart as a countervailing stone voice to the message conveyed by Stuart's edifice. In speaking to the Wiley statue, Michael Paul Williams concluded, "Art, on which Monument Avenue and elsewhere has divided us, has the potential to heal. But that will happen only if we seize the moment to bring tangible meaning to the symbolic force of Kehinde Wiley's striking statue and fashion justice and equity out of a legacy of injustice and inequality." In other words, the healing, liberating message of stone will hold more weight if we humans speak as clearly and as defiantly as a rock. But the question is, in this world where people can be manipulated through promise of reward, fear of retribution, and terror of change, can we Christians who claim to follow Jesus all the way into Jerusalem and beyond speak as powerfully, shout as defiantly as a stone? Can we do that? Can we be that? A stone-cold rumor of righteous revolution. You know, I wish for the Reformed Church that our theology would be a little less divine election and a little more human subscription. We need to be more vocal and less fearful about subscribing, about calling folk out to our vision of God's liberating, transforming, world-altering power. Imagine if the next church were like this. Not this thing where we have been what we have been for all of my lifetime, a place of privilege, a place of security, a place of sanctuary, a place of status and recognition. Oh yeah, that's changing now, right? Christians are not as privileged in society as we used to be, and that scares a lot of us. We worry about our numbers. We worry about our status. We worry about our power. Even so, we don't have to do what Jesus had to do to have our parades and our celebrations. No one is out to stop us the way they were out to stop Jesus. We can walk in and out of our churches unhindered for the most part. We have our Bible studies in coffee shops and breweries and parks and sporting events. Chaplains pray before the gatherings of Congress. Athletes get on one knee and pray at the end of sporting events. People on television routinely thank God for allowing them to do whatever it is they have just done. No one needs a password to come into the church. The ushers are there giving you a bulletin, greeting you, welcoming you in, getting anybody who's on the street, come on in. It's not like what it was when Jesus had to create a secret signal to get his password and his Passover going. Where once you got on the parade route or sat down at the Last Supper, you found yourself in this dangerous gathering where this man was declaring this dangerous truth that was so radical, so subversive that the people in power would do everything in their power to keep you from believing it, speaking it, or acting it out. Jesus' threat to us is that if we don't speak the radical, subversive, revolutionary, messianic message, the rocks will. Jesus' question to us is, can we be at least as faithful, at least as expressive, at least as active as a rock? He's not worried about the rocks sitting there, but he's looking at us and saying, don't you just sit there. He doesn't say that to the rocks. Jesus knows the foundational, transformational, revolutionary power of stone. He was calling those qualities into being for the community that would represent his ministry by following up his ministry when he declared outrageously at the time that he declared it that Peter would be the rock upon which we and he would build God's church. Now, that's not us. We're not that rock. We can't even be like that rock. But we can be like the stones on the Jerusalem wayside. We can be pebbles upon which Christ builds a platform for speaking, a choir stand for singing, a pulpit for preaching, a sanctuary door for entering, and a sanctuary exit for leaving, anything but a pew for sitting. We've done enough sitting. Christians and pews are so identified, it's like we are attached to them. We are like napkins under a condensating glass. The glass sweats, the napkin sticks. You can't separate the napkin from the glass, just like I fear sometimes you can't separate the Christians from the pews. A friend showed me once how you sprinkle some pebbles of salt on a napkin before you put your glass on it, and the pebbles of salt keep the napkin from attaching itself to the glass. You pick up the glass, the napkin stays put. You see, we need some rock salt on our pews. Some pebble grains that will keep us condensating Christians from sticking to the furniture so we can stand up and step out into our world with the memory of Jesus and what he stood for on our minds. That is what stones do. Even little pebble stones, they don't let you attach. They don't let you settle. They make you uncomfortable. They goad you into getting up and speaking out. If you can't be the rock upon which Jesus built his church, you can at least be the uncomfortable grain that detaches Christians from their pews and irritates them into our world. Our church needs more rocks. Broken, edgy, calm, smooth, large, cracked, whole, colored, whitewashed, buried in the dirt, lodged uncomfortably in our shoes, raised up on a pedestal, a platform upon which to stand, joined together in a pyramid of opposition to the works against wholeness and healing and equality and empowerment in our world. This is our stone cold moment to be like Jesus, our rock and our Redeemer, to stand on God's promise, raise God's voice, and rock out our world. Amen.